Sometimes the hardest stories to tell are the ones that shaped us most. Today, I want to share something with you that I've carried for decades, a story about love, loss, and the impossible choices we make when the person we love becomes the person we can no longer live with. It's not a pretty story, but it's mine, and maybe somewhere in it, you'll find a piece of truth that helps you understand your own journey. My name is Patricia O'Brien, though everyone's always called me Patty. I'm 79 years old now, sitting here in my little kitchen with these old photographs spread across the table like pieces of a puzzle I've finally learned how to put together. My hands are rough. Decades of work will do that to you. And my hair's gone from that red-brown my Sean used to love to something closer to winter frost. But my eyes still see clearly, and my memory, well, some things you never forget, no matter how much time passes. I met Sean O'Brien in the spring of 1964 at a church dance in South Boston. Lord, he was beautiful. Black Irish, handsome with those dark curls and blue eyes that could make you forget your own name. But more than that, he could sing. When Sean sang, "Danny Boy," grown men would cry into their beer. And when he looked at me and smiled, I felt like the only girl in the world. We married in June of 1965. I wore my mother's wedding dress, altered to fit me, and Sean wore a borrowed suit. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and back then, I thought that was enough. I thought love could conquer anything. I was 20 years old and believed in fairy tales. The babies came quickly, the way they did in Irish Catholic families. Michael first, born 10 months after the wedding, then Kathleen, Patrick, Bridget, Timothy, Colleen, and finally Sean Jr. 7 children in 12 years. 7 little souls depending on me and Sean to give them a life, a future, a chance. In the beginning, Sean was a good father. He'd come home from the construction site covered in dust, his muscles aching, but he'd still throw the kids in the air and make them squeal with laughter. He'd sing them to sleep with old Irish songs his own father had taught him. On Fridays, he'd bring his paycheck home and we'd sit at this very table and count it out. So much for rent, so much for groceries, a little bit saved for emergencies. But somewhere around 1968, things started to change. The Friday night drinks with the boys from the crew started getting longer. Sean would come home later, louder, his breath heavy with whiskey. He'd say it was just unwinding, just blowing off steam from a hard week's work, and I believed him because I wanted to, because I needed to. By 1970, I couldn't pretend anymore. The paychecks got smaller. Sean would swear up and down that the foreman was cheating him, that the hours were being cut, but I'd find receipts in his pockets from bars I'd never heard of, the Shamrock, the Celtic Cross, O'Malley's Tap Room. He was spending in one night what should have fed us for a week. I remember the first time I had to water down the milk to make it stretch further. Little Bridget, she was maybe 5 years old. She looked up at me with those big eyes and said, "Mama, the milk tastes funny." I told her it was a new kind, a special kind, and she believed me because children believe their mothers. That lie tasted worse than any watered-down milk ever could. The disappearances started around then, too. Sean would leave for work on Monday morning and not come home until Wednesday night. No phone call, no explanation. He'd just show up reeking of alcohol and cigarettes, sometimes with bruises from bar fights, always with empty pockets. I'd be frantic, wondering if he was dead in a ditch somewhere, while the children asked where Daddy was, and I ran out of lies to tell them. I went to Father Murphy at St. Augustine's. I was desperate, you understand. In those days, in our community, you didn't just leave your husband. Marriage was sacred. Suffering was part of a woman's burden. But Father Murphy, bless him, he came and talked to Sean, sat right there where you're imagining me sitting now, and talked about responsibility, about family, about the sin of neglecting your duties to your children. Sean cried, promised to change, swore on his mother's grave that he'd stop drinking, that he'd be the man we needed him to be. And for a week, maybe 2, he'd keep that promise. He'd come straight home, hand over his whole paycheck, play with the kids. I'd let myself hope. That was the cruelest part, the hoping. Then the pattern would start again. 1 drink, just 1, then 2, then a weekend bender, then the paychecks disappearing again. The children started to change how they looked at him. I watched it happen, and it broke my heart in new ways every single day. Michael, my eldest, he went from running to the door when his father came home to barely looking up from his homework. Little Kathleen stopped asking Daddy to read her bedtime stories. They learned not to expect anything from him, and God, that's a terrible thing for children to learn about their own father. Christmas of 1975. I'll never forget it. I'd been saving quarters and dimes in a coffee can hidden in the back of my closet. Took me months to save $30. I bought each child one small gift. Nothing fancy, just something so they'd have something to open Christmas morning. A doll for the girls, a toy truck for the boys, some books. Christmas Eve, Sean came home so drunk he could barely stand. The next morning, while the children were opening their modest presents with brave smiles, trying to be grateful, he was passed out on the sofa, snoring. 7-year-old Patrick looked at him, then looked at me and said, "It's okay, Mama. We don't need a lot of stuff." That's when I knew I had to do more than just survive Sean's drinking. I had to build a life that didn't depend on him at all. I got a job at Murphy's Diner on Washington Street, 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, 5 days a week. The tips weren't great, but they were steady, and Mrs. Murphy let me take home the leftover bread and sometimes soup at the end of my shift. I'd feed that to the children for dinner, dress it up with some vegetables from the garden I'd started growing in our tiny backyard. But one job wasn't enough, not with 7 growing children and a husband who contributed nothing but heartache. So I took a second job cleaning offices downtown, 3 to 6 in the evening, Monday through Friday. I'd leave the older kids, Michael and Kathleen, in charge of the younger ones. Michael was only 12, but he was responsible beyond his years. He had to be. Then I found a third job. A wealthy family on Beacon Hill needed someone to do their ironing and mending. I'd go there after the office cleaning, from 7 until 10 at night, pressing shirts and fixing hems in their pristine laundry room, while their children slept upstairs, unaware of how the other half lived. I slept 4 hours a night if I was lucky. I'd get home around 10:30, make sure the children had done their homework and brushed their teeth, kiss them goodnight, and then sit at this table paying bills, stretching every dollar until it screamed. Then I'd sleep from midnight to 4, get up, make breakfast, and start all over again. My body ached constantly. My feet felt like they were made of concrete. I developed this pain in my lower back that never quite went away, even now. But I couldn't stop. 7 children needed food, clothes, shoes. They needed school supplies and winter coats and medicine when they got sick. And Sean? Sean would show up sometimes, disappear other times. When he was there, he'd rage about how I was never home, how I was neglecting the children to work. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so painful. I was working 3 jobs because he'd drunk away his paycheck. I was gone because he'd abandoned his responsibilities. But in his pickled mind, I was the one failing our family. The absolute worst came in the spring of 1982. We had a savings account. I'd opened it in 1967, back when I still had hope. Every week, I'd put whatever I could in there. Sometimes it was just $5. Sometimes, if I'd had a good week of tips, it might be 20. Over 15 years, I'd managed to save $8,000. $8,000. It was going to send Michael to college. It was going to give my children a chance at something better. Sean had known about it, of course. I thought it was safe because both our names were on the account. I'd thought, foolishly, that he'd never touch the children's future. I found out when I went to make a deposit, and the teller looked at me with pity. "Mrs. O'Brien," she said quietly, "your account was closed last month." The floor seemed to tilt under me. "That's impossible," I said. "There must be a mistake." She showed me the withdrawal slip. Sean's signature, $8,000, gone, every penny. I walked home in a daze. When I got there, I went through Sean's things like a woman possessed. I found betting slips, receipts from liquor stores, a pawn ticket for my mother's wedding ring, which I hadn't even noticed was missing. He'd taken everything. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd saved to give our children a future. He'd gambled it away and drunk it up and pissed it out. That night, I waited for him. I sent the children to bed early. I sat in the dark living room and I waited. He came home around 11, stumbling drunk as usual. He was surprised to see me awake, sitting there in my chair like a judge waiting to pass sentence. "Where's the money, Sean?" I asked. My voice was calm. I surprised myself with how calm it was. He tried to bluster. "What money?" "The $8,000, our savings, the children's college fund. Where is it?" He laughed. Actually laughed. "I needed it, Patty. I had debts. You had debts," I repeated. "You had debts, so you stole from your children's future." "It's my money too," he shouted. "I worked for it." That's when something in me broke. Or maybe it was the opposite. Maybe that's when something in me finally became whole. "No," I said, standing up. "No, Sean. You didn't work for it. I worked for it. I worked 3 jobs while you drank yourself stupid. I went without sleep, without food sometimes, to put money in that account. And you took it. You took everything." He got that mean look he got when he was drunk and cornered. "What are you going to do about it, Patty? You going to leave me? Where would you go? Who'd want you with 7 kids? I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw a stranger. The beautiful boy who'd sung to me at church dances was gone. In his place was a bitter, selfish man who'd chosen alcohol over his own children. "You need to leave," I said quietly. "This is my house." "No," I said, my voice stronger now. "This is a rental house, and I pay the rent with my wages. You haven't contributed a single dollar to this family in years. All you've given us is pain and disappointment and fear. I want you to leave." He raised his fist, and for a moment I thought he might actually hit me. He'd never struck me before, but there's always a first time with desperate men. But then Michael appeared in the doorway, my 14-year-old son, tall and thin, standing in his pajamas. "Don't touch my mother," he said, and his voice didn't waver. Sean looked at him, then at me. Something passed across his face, shame, maybe, or the sudden realization of everything he'd destroyed. Without another word, he turned and walked out. He took a bag with some clothes and he left. Just like that. I wish I could tell you that when he left, everything got easier. In some ways it did. The emotional burden lifted. I no longer had to wonder if he'd come home drunk, if he'd spent the rent money, if he'd disappoint the children again. That constant anxiety, that waiting for the other shoe to drop, that was gone. But in practical terms, everything got harder. 1 income, 7 children. I kept my 3 jobs. I added a 4th on weekends, cleaning houses in the suburbs. I slept even less. I ate even less. I wore the same 3 dresses in rotation until they were more patches than original fabric. But I also taught the children things I hadn't been able to teach them when I was trying to manage Sean's chaos. I showed them how to grow vegetables. We expanded that little garden until our backyard was full of tomatoes, beans, lettuce, cucumbers. In the summer, we canned and preserved everything we could. The children learned to cook from scratch, to make a pot of soup last 3 days, to bake bread that would fill their bellies better than anything from the store. I taught them how to sew. Kathleen became so good at it that she started altering clothes for neighbors and making a little money. I taught them to mend and patch, to make old things new again. We shopped at thrift stores and held our heads high because there's no shame in wearing second-hand clothes when they're clean and mended with care. Most importantly, I taught them that we were a family, that we had each other. On Sunday mornings, after church, we'd come home and make a big breakfast together. Pancakes when I could afford flour and eggs, oatmeal when I couldn't. We'd sit around this table and talk about our week, our dreams, our worries. We'd sing together, the same Irish songs Sean used to sing, but without the shadow of his drinking hanging over us. I told them they could be anything they wanted to be, that poverty wasn't a life sentence, that their father's failures didn't have to be their own. I made them promise me they'd finish high school, that they'd work hard, that they'd be kind, that they'd never, ever touch alcohol the way their father had. There were hard times. Lord, were there hard times. The Thanksgiving when I could only afford a small chicken instead of a turkey. We had 13 people to feed with that little bird. I was nearly in tears as I carved it, trying to make it stretch. And 11-year-old Bridget, sweet Bridget, she put her hand on mine and said, "Mama, this is the best chicken in the whole world because you made it with love." I cried then, not from the poverty or the exhaustion or the weight of it all, but from love. From the overwhelming love I felt for these 7 souls who never complained, who always found ways to be grateful, who'd learned to find joy in the smallest things. The year Colleen needed glasses and I couldn't afford them, the older children pooled their allowances, the tiny amounts they earned doing chores for neighbors, and bought her a pair from the discount store. They weren't perfect, but they helped her see the blackboard at school. When Timothy wanted to join the school band but we couldn't afford to rent an instrument, Father Murphy found an old donated trumpet that was dented and tarnished. Timothy polished it until it shone and practiced until his lips were sore. He got good enough to earn a music scholarship to college later. Every challenge we faced together. And somehow, we survived. More than survived, we thrived in our own way. The years passed, the children grew. One by one, they graduated high school, every single one of them. And one by one, with scholarships and part-time jobs and sheer determination, they went to college. Michael became a teacher. Kathleen became a nurse. Patrick became an engineer. Bridget became a teacher like her brother. Timothy got that music scholarship and became a social worker. Colleen became a chef. And Sean Jr., my baby, he became a teacher too. 3 teachers, a nurse, an engineer, a chef, and a social worker. 7 successful, kind, hard-working adults who broke the cycle of poverty and addiction that could have claimed them. Now I'm 79 years old. I live in a small apartment that my children insisted on paying for. They each send me money every month, even though I tell them not to. "Mama," they say, "you sacrificed everything for us. Now it's our turn to take care of you." I have 19 grandchildren now, and they call me Nana. They come over for Sunday dinners, and my apartment fills with noise and laughter and love. None of my children touch alcohol, not a drop. When I asked them about it once, Michael said, "We saw what it did to Dad. We saw what it did to you, to all of us. We made a choice." Last year, I received a letter I never expected. It was from the Veterans Hospital downtown. Sean was there, dying of cirrhosis. His liver had finally given out after decades of abuse. He wanted to see me. I almost didn't go. What did I owe him after everything? But then I thought about that young man at the church dance, the one who'd made me laugh, who'd sung so beautifully. I thought about the few good years we'd had before the alcohol took him, and I thought about forgiveness, not for him, but for myself, for my own peace. So I went. He was barely recognizable. The handsome man I'd married had become a shell, yellow-skinned and skeletal, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed. His eyes, though, his eyes were the same blue. "Patty," he whispered when he saw me. "You came." I sat down beside his bed. "I came." "I'm sorry," he said, and tears ran down his face. "I'm so sorry for everything. I destroyed our family. I destroyed everything good in my life. I thought about all the years of pain, all the sacrifices, all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep wondering how I'd feed my children. I thought about the money he'd stolen, the promises he'd broken, the childhood he'd stolen from our kids. But I also thought about forgiveness, about the weight we carry when we hold on to anger. "You destroyed yourself, Sean," I said quietly. "But you didn't destroy us. We survived. We thrived even. The children, you should see them. Michael's a teacher, one of the best in Boston. Kathleen's a nurse supervisor at Mass General. Patrick's an engineer. Bridget teaches special education. Timothy's a social worker helping families in crisis. Colleen owns her own catering business. Sean Jr. teaches high school English." He closed his eyes, more tears falling. "They turned out good despite me. They turned out good because they had to," I said. "They learned strength from watching me work 3 jobs. They learned perseverance from watching me refuse to give up. They learned what not to do from watching you drink yourself to death. Do they hate me? I thought about that. I don't think they hate you. I think they pity you. I think they're sad for what might have been. But hate? No. I taught them that hate is a burden that weighs you down. Do you hate me, Patty? I looked at this dying man, this stranger who'd once been my husband, and I felt nothing. Not love, not hate, just a kind of distant sadness for all the wasted years. No, I said honestly. I don't hate you. I did, for a long time. But I let it go because hating you was like drinking poison and expecting you to die. I forgave you for my sake, not yours, so I could live without that weight. He died 3 days later. The children asked if I wanted them to come to the funeral. I told them it was their choice. Michael and Kathleen came. The others didn't. I understood both decisions. At the funeral, there were maybe a dozen people. Some old drinking buddies who looked like they were heading down the same path. His sister from New York, Father Murphy, because he was a good man who believed in showing compassion, even to those who'd squandered it. Standing at that grave, I thought about all the years, all the pain, all the struggle, and I thought about my 7 children, my 19 grandchildren, the life I'd built from nothing. After the service, Kathleen put her arm around me. "Mom," she said, "do you regret marrying him?" I looked at her, this strong, capable woman who'd become a healer, who broke the cycle of dysfunction and built a beautiful life. I looked at Michael, standing tall and proud, a man who'd stepped in as the father figure when he was barely more than a child himself. "I don't regret you," I said. "Not any of you. You 7 are the best thing I ever did with my life. As for your father, he taught me something valuable. He taught me that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. He taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. He taught me that I was stronger than I ever knew. Now, sitting here in my little kitchen with these old photos spread out before me, I think about the lessons I learned. I think about the woman I was at 20, young, naive, believing that love conquered all. And I think about the woman I became, weathered, tired, but unbroken. Alcohol took Sean. It took his health, his family, his dignity, his life. But it didn't take mine. It didn't take my strength or my determination or my capacity to love my children fiercely and completely. I learned that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. I learned that sacrifice is necessary, but martyrdom helps no one. I learned that sometimes protecting your children means removing them from someone they love, even if that someone is their own father. I learned that poverty is hard, but it's not shameful. That working 3 jobs to feed your family is honorable. That hand-me-down clothes and watered-down milk and small Christmases don't make you less worthy of dignity and respect. Most importantly, I learned that children are resilient. That love, real, consistent, unconditional love, can overcome so much. That showing up every single day, even when you're exhausted, even when you're heartbroken, even when you don't know how you'll make it through another week, that showing up is what makes you a parent. My hands are rough from decades of work. My back aches from years of cleaning other people's floors. My feet are gnarled from standing in diners and ironing rooms. But my heart is full of love for 7 extraordinary human beings who could have been broken by their childhood, but instead became healers and teachers and builders and creators. That's my story. Not a pretty one, but an honest one. A story about loving the wrong person, about finding strength you didn't know you had, about raising children in poverty and watching them rise above it. If there's anything I want you to take from this, it's this. You are not defined by the failures of the people who were supposed to love you. You are not trapped by your circumstances. You are stronger than you know, and sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. And alcohol, that poison that so many people think is harmless, just a way to relax or celebrate, it destroys. It destroys families and futures and lives. If my story saves even one person from going down that path, if it gives even one person the strength to walk away from someone who's drowning them, then maybe all those years of struggle meant something beyond just survival. I look at my life now, surrounded by children and grandchildren who visit me, who call me, who make sure I'm never alone. I think about the alternative, staying with Sean, enabling his drinking, watching my children grow up in chaos and dysfunction. And I know I made the right choice. It was the hardest choice, but it was right. Love should lift you up, not drag you down. Family should be your safety, not your suffering. And sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is say enough and mean it. That's what I learned from my years with Sean O'Brien. That's what I hope I taught my children. And that's what I'm telling you now, whoever you are, wherever you are in your own story. You deserve better than someone who chooses their addiction over your well-being. Your children deserve better than growing up in chaos. And it's never too late to choose yourself, to choose your children, to choose life over slow destruction. I'm 79 years old, and I've lived a hard life. But it's been my life, built by my own two hands, filled with love and purpose and meaning. And that despite everything, makes it a good life. That's all any of us can hope for, really. Not perfection, not ease, but the strength to face what comes and the wisdom to know when to hold on and when to let go. I held on to my children. I let go of the man who was destroying us. And I've never regretted that choice, not for a single day.